Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Garrity.
And welcome, everyone, to the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Along with Jim Garrity of National Review, I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have good, and crazy martinis for conservatives today. A quick thanks to Rich McFadden for filling my chair over the past couple of days. Let's move on to our first good martini. Jim, this is not necessarily premised on good news because we're talking about civilian casualties in Mosul as the effort to root out ISIS continues. That part of it's good news. This is from Reuters. The Pentagon facing accusations that a coalition airstrike may have killed scores of civilians in the Iraqi city of Mosul said on Monday it was not loosening its rules of engagement in the fight against Islamic State, but that resources to investigate claims were limited. Eyewitnesses from Mosul and Iraqi officials have said last week's strike on Islamic State targets may have collapsed homes, where rescue officials say as many as 200 people were buried in the rubble. The spokesman for U.S. Central Command, Colonel John Thomas, says the U.S. military does not intend to change the way it carries out strikes, even as the fighting in Mosul enters more densely populated areas. Here's the part that makes it the good martini. We finally have a defense secretary, Jim, who understands the realities of war. We don't want civilian casualties, but sometimes in the effort to defeat the enemy, which knows that you're trying to avoid civilian casualties, they might not be avoidable. Still in the Reuters story, earlier on Monday, U.S. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis appeared to back the way the United States carries out strikes. Quote, "There is no military force in the world that has proven more sensitive to civilian casualties. We go out of our way to always do everything humanly possible to reduce the loss of life or injury among innocent people. The same cannot be said for our adversaries." Jim, it's just really, really nice to have people who have the backs of our troops.
One of the reasons you are seeing an increase in civilian casualties is we've now ramped it up to the neighborhood of like 500 to 600 bombs dropped per week. This is a more aggressive stance. This is a willingness to hit targets that are going to be in areas with civilians. One of the interesting kind of frustrating comments is from a group called Center for Civilians in Conflict, U.S.-based advocacy and research group. And obviously, look, you want to prevent civilian casualties. But the argument he puts forth is the absolute default in every building should be there are going to be civilians present. And as a result of that, I assume not bomb the building.
Right.
Well, you can't. That basically says to ISIS, you're safe as long as you're in a building. Right? I mean, like at some point you have to accept the possibility and, in fact, near certainty that there are going to be civilian casualties. I think it's time for the military and for the U.S. government, for everybody to kind of it's time for some blunt talk about this. You have to choose. And I think over time it becomes clearer and clearer that a key part of leadership is prioritization. You can bomb the heck out of ISIS. You can kill a lot of ISIS fighters. Or you can prevent, or you can have no civilian casualties. But you can't have both. You got to pick one. And I think Mattis strikes exactly the right note here. It's never that we're going to shrug it off, but this is the country that has dropped atomic weapons on people. The bombing of Dresden. Look, this is war, and in war, innocent people die. The question is, do you do more damage by bombing the opposition forces, or do more people suffer and are more people under living threat of violence and death by allowing ISIS to continue? I think the calculus is pretty simple here. The world has got to get rid of ISIS. We've seen unbelievable, unspeakable cruelty from these guys. As soon as these guys are out of business, the world becomes a safer place, even if it ends up with civilian casualties along the way. So it sounds like Iraqi forces are making their way towards Mosul. You're starting to see a real squeeze on these guys. Obviously, the U.S. military should always, review their actions and look at what they could have done differently if it did result in serious numbers of civilian casualties. But look, we are kicking the war against ISIS into a new phase, and it's getting results. I kind of, I salute metaphorically and literally Mattis by saying, this is what you need to do. This is what we need to do, and we need to be realistic with ourselves about the cost. And we can't tell ourselves happy fairy tales that we can do this without, that we can somehow achieve a goal as big and as important as this without civilian casualties.
Yeah, it's just the facts of war, and especially given what the enemy knows. They think that if they hide in the civilian population that we're not going to strike. And, they judge Jim Mattis wrong. And
they should have realized he has tears in his eyes.
That's right. You never want to see him with tears in his eyes. All right, let's move on to our second good martini here, Jim. And amazingly, Chuck Schumer last week during the Gorsuch hearings, I'm not even sure they were over yet, headed to the floor of the United States Senate to announce that he would oppose Gorsuch not only in a final vote, but in the vote to get to a final vote, which means he wants to filibuster him. The words of Chuck Schumer, I'm paraphrasing here, because Judge Gorsuch would not answer a lot of the questions with specificity, mainly his positions on political issues, that Chuck Schumer said he would have to rely on Gorsuch's record. And that's just unacceptable. So he's going to filibuster, and he wants all Democrats to join him. Unknown as of yet whether that will actually happen. It sounds like about half of the Democrats have committed to this, but you would need a lot more. If they get there, that leaves the Republicans, of course, with the decision of what to do about it. Do you stick with the existing rules? Do you go to the nuclear option, which would then require a simple majority vote to change the rule and end the filibuster potentially on Supreme Court nominations? You got Charles Krauthammer over on Fox News saying the Republicans should act like Clint Eastwood and say, go ahead, make my day, because it would be disaster for the Democrats. He thinks they're picking the wrong fight when it comes to Gorsuch, and a lot of other people do as well. Jim, I know there's folks like Mike Lee and others who think you can perhaps split the difference here and just change how filibusters are done, basically actually make the Democrats stand there forever and a day arguing on the Senate floor, and when they run out of steam, you actually vote. So what do you make of all this?
You know, Greg, if you'd said to me a year ago that at this time we'd be watching Senator Orrin Hatch, who we all know as being in the Senate for roughly forever, and who's, generally seen as the genial, kind, soft-spoken guy who wrote a song for Ted Kennedy, likes to write. He's a Care Bear. He's a soft, cuddly guy. He's not the kind of bomb thrower. When Orrin Hatch says, "We are going to confirm Judge Gorsuch by whatever means necessary," and then he changes his name to Orrin X. By any means necessary. There's an interesting, I think the Democrats really are pushing their luck. We will see how this shakes out. But one of the things going for Republicans in this argument, that Neil Gorsuch is not just a terrific pick from the conservative perspective. There's really nothing in his ethical background. There's really no egregiously bad decisions. He is a sterling, shining nominee. So by not giving the Democrats any easy way to justify opposition, they're pretty much making clear we are going to filibuster just about any judge that Trump sends up to the Supreme Court. We just don't think that any Republican judge, any conservative judge is okay. Well, if that's the position of Senate Democrats, then Senate Republicans really have no interest. There's no point in trying to reach out to them, that they're going to just have a blanket opposition to everybody. And as a result of that, you might as well nuke the filibuster, because they're using the filibuster in a very unreasonable, extreme, obstinate way. All the pundit over at Hot Air kind of goes through this and looks and says, look, Lindsey Graham, who used to be part of the Gang of the 14, who did the deal on judges back in the Bush administration, he's ready to nuke, right? There's a little bit of a talk. You're hearing comments from the likes of Susan Collins and John McCain that say, boy, I really don't want to do the nuclear option. And it's kind of interesting. You look at the red state Democrats, most of whom have indicated they're going to vote against Gorsuch, and almost all of whom have said they're going to vote for a filibuster as well. They're not going to vote for cloture. They're not going to cut off debate and move forward with the nomination. In a scenario like that, the question is, how do you maximize pressure with them? Do you maximize pressure by saying, look, I'd really hate to do this, so that if you that you could probably keep the filibuster in place for a future fight if you wanted to? Or do you take the hardline stance and say, look, this is going, we're getting them on there one way or the other? If you're a red state Democrat, are you more afraid of a general election fight, or are you more afraid of a primary fight? Because obviously the grassroots Democrats want their lawmakers to oppose absolutely everything. I think what's interesting is we're going through all of this drama, and there's really nobody who can see any scenario in which Neil Gorsuch does not end up on the Supreme Court. So if you're the Democrats, why give up the filibuster for a fight that you know you're going to lose. They could be on the verge of making a really bad tactical mistake, because if it's gone for the next one, Trump has absolutely no incentive to nominate anybody with any degree of outreach to Democrats or anything like that. He can nominate the most hardline judge he can find, the youngest judge he can find, right? I mean, this basically is going to dramatically alter the decision-making process for Supreme Court nominations if Democrats go ahead with this. And because they're so afraid of the base of the party, because they're so afraid of that anger, they're going to cut off their nose to spite their face. And ultimately that's good news for us. Now, someday the Democrats may control the Senate, and may have a Democratic president. This may come back to bite us in the tush someday. But for now, you're going to get conservative justices, and Democrats are pretty much giving away one of their few tools they have to push for a different nominee.
Yeah, excellent point. And Schumer's argument was that if Republicans can't get the 60 votes, then the responsible thing to do is to withdraw the nominee, not to change the rules, which, Jim, reminds me of what you've said about Chuck Schumer previously over the past few weeks, since he's now called for Jeff Sessions to resign, for the administration to pull Neil Gorsuch, for Devin Nunes to recuse himself from the Russia committee. It would be much shorter if Chuck Schumer just issued a list of people he didn't want to resign.
Yeah, it's pretty much, until further notice, no Republican should ever do anything. Pop quiz, Greg. How many senators voted to confirm Clarence Thomas?
52.
Very good. Very good. Give that man a gold star. Yeah, so there is no 60 vote threshold. This is just made up. And they just we need 6. Wait, well, why not pick 70? Why not say, he's got to have 80 votes? No, you know what? Under the Senate rules, all you need is 50 plus 1. If it's a 50-50 split, the vice president can come in and do it. So Collins, Murkowski, you want to go? We can let you go if you need to. All right. Ironically, both of them really like Neil Gorsuch. So here's the situation, Democrats. If in that case, you can invent whatever thresholds you want that doesn't actually exist. And it's kind of this idea that Bernie Sanders got himself in trouble in which he kept insisting, look, this is not a filibuster. It's just a 60 vote requirement. What? There is no Senate 60 vote requirement. The only requirement is, do you have 60 votes to cut off debate? That's where this comes from. And the Washington Post fact checker called him out on this. And look, I know it's kind of hard to separate from the rest of the crazy stuff that Bernie Sanders says, but in this case, he's just flat out factually wrong.
Clarence Thomas got 11 Democrats to vote for him. Republicans did not control the Senate at the time. So there were some responsible, not crazy Democrats back then. Sam Nunn, John Breaux, people like that. Not a lot like them left.
It was a different culture then. I mean, at that point, Ruth Bader Ginsburg got close to 100 senators voted.
Oh, yeah.
I think Antonin Scalia got, 98? I mean,
he was unanimous, yeah.
We had a time where, look, if it was a good judge, whether or not you like the kind of decisions they were going to make, they got approved. We can decide whether we like this way of doing it better or that way of doing it better. But Democrats, you can't expect a world in which you get broad support for your nominees, but you don't have to support any Republican nominees.
The double standards. Anyway, on to the crazy martini now, Jim. And I don't know if you paid attention to the news last week, but apparently there was some difficulty moving a health care bill through the House of Representatives. It made the news a little bit. Republicans couldn't get to the number to move it, so they pulled the bill. And now Trump, first of all, said, well, if this doesn't happen, we'll just let it implode. I'll blame the Democrats. But then, lo and behold, Tuesday, he's at a dinner at the White House for senators, and he brought up health care again and seems to think that actually it's not that tough after all.
I know that we're all going to make a deal on health care. That's such an easy one. So I have no doubt that that's going to happen very quickly. I think it will, actually. I think it's going to happen because we've all been promising, Democrat, Republican, we've all been promising that to the American people. So I think a lot of good things are going to happen.
Jim, don't you love how everyone in the room assumed it was a joke at first, and then he goes into it and says, no, really, I think this will be easy. So I don't know if this means he plans to move away from repeal and replace, bring more Democrats on board, and maybe some more moderate Republicans. I'm not sure what he has in mind. I'm not sure he knows what he has in mind. But do you think he just said that because of what's happened, or do you think he's really shifting strategies here?
In today's Morning Jolt, I realize we're only at day 69 of the Trump administration. I'm sure a lot of people say it feels like longer. Even if you like Trump, it's been a really dramatic 69 days here. But I tried to kind of just to sort out what's going right for them and what's going wrong for them. And I came up with a pretty long list of both of them. I tried to be very even-handed about this. But I definitely recognize there are a lot of cases where Trump has made big, bold promises. And particularly back on the campaign trail, but even today, he makes things sound like, oh, this is going to be easy. And then, of course, you may recall, Greg, not that long ago, in the midst of the healthcare fight, Trump said, look, no one had any idea healthcare could be so complicated. What? I mean, that's basically saying, I have not paid any attention to my briefing books at all. I thought this was no, it's not simple. It's not simple at all. It's extremely complicated. Anybody who's written about this, studied this, tried to offer legislation about this, governors know this. Almost anybody who's paid any attention knows this is really complicated. And now he's back at it again, saying this is going to be easy. Look, Mr. President, you just went through this experience, which it was very, very difficult to get 218 votes in the Senate, 218 votes in the House, at least 50 votes in the Senate for a reconciliation bill, 60 votes unless they eliminate the filibuster for legislation in the for non-financial aspects of healthcare reform. Yeah, this is going to be really difficult, and I kind of wonder. There was a piece by Connor Friedersdorf in The Atlantic that was really ripping into conservative media, and a lot of it was overwrought, and a lot of it was name calling and things like that. But there were one or two valid points in there, and I think it's safe to say that Republicans and some of their most friendly allies in the media made it sound like this was going to be easy. Made it sound like this was going to be bing, bang, boom. You passed the repeal, completely downplayed any aspects of the bill that were popular, not just the aspects like people staying on their young people in their early to mid-20s staying on their parents' plans, pre-existing conditions, but even the expansion of Medicaid. Look, one of the reasons conservatives don't like expanding entitlement programs is because once you give somebody something, it's very difficult to take them back. There are some Republicans who are very comfortable with taking away the Medicaid expansion. And all of a sudden you got 10 million, 11 million people who don't have coverage that they used to have. Now, some people are going to say, all right, tough to be you. Go find some on the individual market. Except the individual market is the part that's falling apart the fastest. So that's the part where you have all these counties and all these states where you only have one insurer still handling it. And obviously with the lack of competition, you have very high rates. Just walking through all of this, you can see all the different complications to this. And now Trump is running around saying it's going to be easy again. It's as if he's learned nothing. So that's why I nominate this as the crazy Martini. I realize I'm a former never Trump guy and a Trump skeptic. I really want to see him succeed in this place. In this situation, I really want to see Obamacare replaced with something better, something that incorporates free market ideas and gets more competition amongst insurers so that the rates come down. But man, oh man, when he runs around doing this kind of stuff, it just seems like he's setting himself and his fans up for disappointment again. So, that's where we are with this administration. He's capable of making almost the exact same mistake 1 week after another.
We'll see. I wonder if that was a shot at the Republicans for their infighting and the inability to get it done, and him trying to separate himself from that and saying,
if you decide you like single payer, yeah, you can get a lot of Democratic votes.
Right. Yeah. Not sure what he has in mind. We'll see if he articulates that a little more clearly down the road. Jim, good to be back with you. Talk to you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today, and be sure to tune in again on Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.